In the attic of Rye Town Hall, behind a door the public rarely sees, there is a gibbet cage containing a human skull. It has been there since the 1740s. The town below sits 2 miles from the open sea, connected to a harbour that took 63 years to build and lasted 4 months. Beneath the cobblestones of Mermaid Street, tunnels run between medieval cellars, where armed gangs stored 2 tons of tea in a single night. That was 1747. By 1853, the trade was finished. The government did not arrest its way to victory. It simply removed the profit. The name Rye comes from the Old English word for island, and for most of its early life that is precisely what it was. The town sits on a sandstone hilltop at the confluence of 3 rivers, the Rother, the Tillingham, and the Breda, in the far southeast corner of England. Medieval maps show it surrounded almost entirely by water, perched above a vast inlet of the English Channel called the Rye Camber, with safe anchorage and deep water access to the busiest shipping lanes in northern Europe. The French coast was visible on a clear day. Iron from the Wealden forges was stored and shipped from the harbour, probably as early as Roman times. The advantage did not last. Storms in the 13th century drove enormous quantities of shingle through longshore drift, blocking the port entrance to the northeast. The Great Storm of February 1287, which effectively destroyed the nearby town of New Romney by filling its harbour with sand, redirected the River Rother so that it now reached the sea near Rye. A brief windfall. The silting followed the river. Therefore, what had been a coastal port became, over the following centuries, a river port, each decade a little further from the open water. Landowners on Romney Marsh and Walland Marsh made the problem worse, reclaiming marshland from the sea and reducing the tidal flows that were supposed to keep the harbour navigable. Acts of Parliament were passed to keep the Rother open. The river did not cooperate. During the 12th century, Rye had been incorporated into one of the most privileged institutions in English maritime history. The Cinque Ports Confederation, dating to the reign of Edward the Confessor, bound the coastal towns of Hastings, Romney, Hythe, Dover and Sandwich to the Crown in exchange for providing warships at their own expense. Rye and its neighbour Winchelsea joined as ancient towns, initially attached as limbs of Hastings, then granted the full privileges of the original 5 before Henry II died in 1189. In 1336, Rye was made a Cinque Port in its own right. The privileges were considerable: exemption from tax and customs duties, trading concessions across the kingdom, rights to hold their own judicial courts, self-governance. One Rye seaman sailed with Drake around the world. The town was considered one of the finest of the Cinque Ports, and its position on the narrowest stretch of the English Channel made it a frontline defence against continental invasion. The French understood this. In 1377, a fleet under Admiral Jean de Vienne attacked and held the town for a week. The assault left Rye burnt almost to the ground. Only structures of stone survived. The bells of St. Mary's Church were taken. The English government's response was to punish Rye's own citizens for what it called faint-hearted resistance. Several leading citizens were hanged. The mayor was accused of allowing the French in. The men of Rye and Winchelsea did not wait for official retribution. They sailed across the Channel and attacked the French town of Saint-Pierre-en-Port, recovering the stolen bells, taking hostages for ransom, and burning the place to the ground. Within 3 years, massive stone defences were erected at Rye, thick town walls and 4 gates. Only Landgate survives today. The French returned in 1449 and set fire to the town again. The rebuilding after 1377 produced the Rye that still stands. The Mermaid Inn was reconstructed in 1420, using timber taken from broken-up ships, above cellars that had survived the fire since 1156. Queen Elizabeth I stayed at the inn in 1573 during a royal procession and reportedly named the town Rye Royale. The decline had already begun. The honour came too late to matter. By the late 15th century, England's wars demanded larger and more permanent naval vessels, ships too big for Rye's shrinking harbour. The fall of Calais in 1558 severed English merchants from the continental trade networks they had built over centuries. Rye traders who owned property in France were expelled. Commerce shifted westward towards the Atlantic ports and the New World. Daniel Defoe, visiting in the early 18th century, observed that Rye would flourish again if its harbour, once able to receive the Royal Navy, could be restored. He thought it doubtful. He was right. During the 18th century, the Rye Harbour Commission spent 63 years attempting to construct a new harbour under the Rye Harbour Act of 1723. John Smeaton, the civil engineer who built the Eddystone Lighthouse, was brought in as consultant in 1763. The commission largely ignored his advice. The harbour finally opened for use in June 1787 and was abandoned in November of the same year. 4 months. The town that had defended England against invasion had nothing left to defend. The Cinque Port's tradition of tax exemption and self-governance, intended to reward loyal service to the Crown, had produced a population that regarded customs duty as an imposition rather than a civic obligation. The harbour was gone. The trade was gone. What replaced it was smuggling. Edward I had introduced the customs system in 1275, devising a duty on wool exports as revenue for the Crown. Wool was England's most important raw material, with long, tough fibres prized by continental manufacturers in Flanders and France. Evasion began immediately. The first recorded smuggling prosecution near Rye dates from 1357, when an Admiralty inquest was held to collect evidence against one Simon Portier for exporting uncustomed wool from the port of Pevensey. In 1614, the export of wool was forbidden entirely. The ban would remain in force until 1825. Therefore, what had been evasion became outright outlawry. The smugglers who dealt in wool were called owlers, a name reflecting their preference for working at night and their use of owl-like hooting calls to communicate across the dark expanses of Romney Marsh. The marsh was the focal point. Henry Baker, supervisor for Kent and Sussex, wrote on the 25th of April, 1699, that some 160,000 sheep would be shorn on the marsh that season, yielding roughly 3,000 packs of wool. The greatest part, Baker wrote, would immediately be sent off hot into France. One estimate put the annual total at 150,000 packs of wool smuggled out of England. Calais alone imported 40,000 packs from Kent and Sussex within 2 years. The owlers bought wool many miles inland and transported it to the coast in armed convoys under cover of darkness. They knew every creek, every crossing point, every dike on the marsh. A pursuing customs officer named W. Carter was chased from the marsh by 50 armed owlers, fleeing through Lydd and Ormond and Camber Point to take refuge in boats at Guildford Ferry, reaching Rye safe. By his own account, but breathless. Many smugglers crossing the marsh at night wore disguises. The most common was the bee skep, a hood woven from straw in the shape of a beehive, with holes cut for the eyes and mouth. It became a hanging offence to wear any such disguise while smuggling. In 1698, the Act to prevent the exportation of wool introduced the death penalty for wool smuggling. The owlers did not stop. They grew more desperate. By the turn of the 18th century, the direction of the trade had reversed. Heavy duties imposed to finance England's wars against France, the Dutch, and the Spanish made common goods prohibitively expensive. Candles, beer, tea, silk, lace, tobacco, brandy. The same French ports that had received English wool now shipped back contraband in the other direction. A farm labourer in the 18th century earned roughly 7 shillings a week. A single night's work for the smugglers paid 10. 5 cutters operating out of Boulogne smuggled approximately 10,000 gallons of brandy into Kent and Sussex every week. In 1777, excise officers estimated that over 1,100 tons of tea had been landed on the Kent and Sussex coasts that year alone, more tea smuggled in than imported through legal channels. Government figures from 1782 estimated that a quarter of all vessels engaged in smuggling nationwide were based in Kent and Sussex. Parliament had convened committees in 1745 and 1746 to investigate the financial damage, which ran to millions of pounds annually in lost duties. The Customs Service, charged with stopping all of this, had 20 armed revenue craft and 4 small navy ships to cover the entire coastline of England and Wales. 24 vessels. By 1700, riding officers had been appointed to patrol the coast on horseback. 1 man, 1 horse. £25 a year, riding alone at night, required to listen to rumours and keep a low profile. The odds were not in their favour. Rye's physical geography made it the natural capital of this trade. Narrow cobbled streets lined with dark headlands, vaulted medieval cellars beneath almost every building, tunnel networks connecting one cellar to another, the vast uninhabited expanse of Romney Marsh stretching out behind the town, and France visible across the water, a few hours away by cutter. Corruption held the whole enterprise together. Town officials were paid off, elections were conducted without secret ballot, and parliamentary candidates struck deals with smuggling gangs to coerce the electorate. The politician agreed to make criminal charges disappear. The smugglers delivered votes. Rye had 2 members of parliament despite its tiny population, a classic rotten borough. Magistrates were bribed. Prospective MPs visited the pubs and plied voters with beer. The Mermaid Inn sat at the centre of it. Secret passages connected the stone cellars of the inn to the Old Bell Inn on a parallel street, the escape route concealed at the far end behind a cupboard, built to revolve on its hinges. Thomas Bean, the inn's landlord in 1735 and again in 1751, was in open collusion with the most violent smuggling gang in the south of England. He assisted in the kidnapping of Gabriel Tompkins, the bailiff of the Sheriff of Sussex, from the inn itself. After Bean's second tenure, the Rye Corporation quietly moved their official business elsewhere. The Hawkhurst gang had taken over the Mermaid Inn. The Hawkhurst gang was first mentioned as the Hawkhurst Genge in 1735, named after the village of Hawkhurst in Kent. By 1740, they had evolved from a small local operation into a fighting force that dominated smuggling across the south of England. They sat openly at the Mermaid Inn windows, drinking and smoking their pipes, with their loaded pistols lying on the table before them. No magistrate dared to interfere. That detail survives in the writings of William Holloway, recording the memory of a Rye man born in 1740. They could muster as many as 600 men to unload a single ship. In 1744, they landed contraband from 3 large cutters at Pevensey, requiring over 250 packhorses to carry the goods inland. Customs officers who fell into their hands were sold to the French as galley slaves. In 1740, riding officer Thomas Carswell and a party of dragoons discovered roughly 750 kilograms of smuggled tea in a barn at Etchingham. James Stanford of the Hawkhurst gang gathered 30 armed men, drank brandy for courage, and attacked the revenue party at Silver Hill. Carswell was shot dead. George Chapman, one of the attackers, was later executed and gibbeted in his home village of Hurst Green. When 20 members of the gang were drinking at the Mermaid Inn, Some wandered to the nearby Red Lion and fired guns in the air. A young bystander named James Marshall took too keen an interest in them. He was taken away and never seen again. On the 22nd of September 1747, the smuggling ship Three Brothers was intercepted by a revenue vessel off Christchurch Bay. The cargo was approximately 2 tons of tea, 39 casks of brandy and rum, and a small bag of coffee. The goods were impounded at the Poole Customs House in Dorset, far from Hawkhurst territory. It did not matter. 30 armed men, including Hawkhurst gang leaders Thomas Kingsmill and William Farrell, rode to Poole, resting in the New Forest. They arrived at 11 at night and found the customs house covered by the guns of a naval sloop in the harbour. The local men wanted to abandon the attempt. The Hawkhurst men said they would continue alone. Everyone then agreed to continue. They waited in the dark outside the customs house. As the tide in Poole Harbour fell, the sloop's guns lost their firing angle on the building. At 2 in the morning on the 8th of October, the gang broke in, escaping on horseback with the tea. The brandy, rum and coffee were left behind. They had not brought enough horses. The consequences of the Poole raid reached further than the tea. John Diamond, a member of the raiding party, was recognised in Fordingbridge by a shoemaker named Daniel Charter, to whom Diamond had given a small bag of tea. During the ride home, Diamond was arrested. William Galley, a minor customs official, was dispatched to escort Charter to Chichester to identify Diamond before a magistrate. On Valentine's Day 1748, the pair stopped at the White Hart Inn at Rowlands Castle. It was a smuggler's pub. The landlady sent for gang associates. Galley and Charter were plied with drink until they passed out. The gang discovered the warrant. What followed was recorded in detail in the Goodwood manuscripts. William Jackson woke the 2 men by raking their faces. Both were driven outside by horsewhip lashes, placed together on a horse with their feet tied beneath the animal's belly. Over a 5-mile journey, the lashing continued. Both men repeatedly slid beneath the horse, their heads striking the hooves. Galley died from his injuries and was buried in a fox earth in the woodland at Hartingcombe. When his body was recovered 7 months later, his arms were raised upwards, as if shielding himself. Chater was chained inside a rough shelter of turf and earth for 3 days, while the gang decided what to do with him. They attempted to hang him, but the rope was too short. They threw him down Harris's Well, a drop of 30 feet, then hurled large stones and fence posts down upon him. The Duke of Richmond paid over £20 to send 50 soldiers to search for the bodies. Galley's was found on the 15th of September 1748. Chater's was found 2 days later. The previous spring, the village of Goudhurst had decided it had endured enough. William Sturt, a 29-year-old former corporal from Harrison's regiment of foot, organised a militia called the Goudhurst Band. Thomas Kingsmill, a native of Goudhurst, threatened to burn the village and broil and eat the hearts of its defenders. He set a date, the 21st of April, 1747. Sturt trained his men, dug trenches, erected barricades, and stationed snipers in the church tower of St. Mary's and in upstairs windows overlooking the road. The gang attacked on the appointed day. Sturt's militia shot dead Kingsmill's brother George in the first volley. 2 more smugglers fell before the gang withdrew. Lidshot from 1747 survives embedded in the oak church door at Goudhurst. Musket balls can still be found in the earth near the hedgerows. At least 75 members of the Hawkhurst gang were hanged or transported. 14 had their bodies gibbeted, a punishment usually reserved for murderers, reflecting the severity with which the authorities now viewed the gang. Thomas Kingsmill and William Fairall were executed at Tyburn on the 26th of April, 1749. Kingsmill's body was returned to Goudhurst for gibbeting. The Smuggler's Stone on Broyle Road in Chichester, erected in 1749, records the execution of 6 smugglers. It still stands. The executions at Tyburn did not end smuggling. Economics did. In 1784, Pitt cut the duty on tea, removing the core profit motive. The smugglers shifted to other goods, and the duties rose again. In 1821, the National Coast Guard Service was introduced, with shore-based patrols, a rowing guard offshore, and revenue cutters at sea. Coast Guard cottages were built at regular intervals around the coast. The infrastructure of enforcement, for the first time, matched the scale of the problem. The decisive blow came from trade policy, not law enforcement. Gladstone removed hundreds of tariffs as part of the free trade reforms of the first half of the 19th century. The wholesale reform of the Customs Service in 1853 ensured a loyal and efficient force. Smuggling thereafter was relatively unimportant. The government had not defeated the smugglers. It had made their profession pointless. Rye today has a population of under 5,000. An estimated 1 million visits were made in 2016. The town remains 2 miles from the open sea. The harbour functions, but only for small fishing boats, registered RX, Rye, Sussex, and yachts. The Mermaid Inn operates as a hotel. Its monthly guided tours take visitors through the 600-year-old building, past the medieval cellars and hidden passages where the Hawkhurst gang once stored their contraband. Much of the fish landed daily at Rye is sold through the regional market in Boulogne. Sent to France through legal channels, at last.